couple of years ago I put a router in the extension wing of my table saw. Since then I've learnt quite a few lessons, so I've rebuilt the router table, I've made a new router table fence design, I have a new router, and I have an awesome new router lift from Kreg. In this episode we'll build the router table as well as the router table fence and mount the router lift. In the next episode we'll explore some more dust collection options, particularly under the table, some cabinets for the router table and some accessories. So roughly speaking, this is how everything's going to be laid out, though this is flipped, it's upside down. These smaller pieces here will add as a good support, sort of as a mini torsion box type system. And the reason why they're a little bit thinner is, frankly, I just ran out of material. These are offcuts of a sheet of hardwood ply I had. Got the main tabletop and that was the main point. However, that's not the end of the world. This will provide ample support, and when it comes to this plate, it's actually not a bad thing anyway, because I'm going to be using Kreg's insert plate leveler things. I'll go into these a bit more later, and they just add a little bit of extra width to the plate. The position of the router lift and the router isn't overly critical in relation to the supports, at least not at this stage. The main thing is where the bolts are for the table saw fence. We want to avoid putting any supports in the way of that, otherwise we won't be able to actually screw the whole thing together. I'm going with pocket holes for the subframe joinery. It's more than strong enough for the application and gives me an undoability, which ended up being a good thing as I did need to remove a few things a little bit later. So using two small pieces of double-sided tape, I've attached the router lift where I want the opening of the bit, so I drew a crosshair and lined that up. I've also added some masking tape to the edges of the router lift itself, because that's going to give us just a little bit of extra clearance. So now I can take these strips of MDF, butt them up against the router lift, double-side tape these down, remove the router lift, and we can get to actually cutting the opening. One of the trickier parts now is to cut out this radius in our insert. It doesn't really have to be radiused, but it will look nicer. On the Kreg plates and lips, this is actually a 3/4 inch or 19mm radius. So we can take an 1.5 inch or a 38.1mm bit, butt it up against our template so it is contacting, and drill through, and that'll give us a perfect radius. Then we can just cut along the lines with a jigsaw and it should be a pretty good fit. The groove for the miter track was routed in several stages using a 1/2 inch spiral upcut bit in a plunge router. First pass was the shallow cut, then increasing depth until I got to my full depth. Then I could adjust the router's fence position to widen the slot and rinse and repeat for the multi-stage depth cuts. When I was close to the width I needed, I did a partial pass, checked whether the miter track fit or not, and bumped the fence over until it was the right fit. I repeated this process for the two T-tracks that run perpendicular to the miter track. Most importantly, I added a coat of black water-based dye to match in with the SawStop and Kreg router lift's colour scheme. Off camera, I added a few coats of water-based polyurethane to add protection and provide a slicker surface. To attach the router lift and level it, I'm going to be using Kreg's insert plate levelers. So these have a bit of a lip. The lip will be facing upwards or currently away from us because this is the bottom side of the router table. That has the same radius as this cutout here, so it fits in really nice and easily. These 3 holes need to be drilled for screws, and they actually would attach the thing, the leveling plate. Kreg do include a set of screws and a driver for attaching these, but that's only if you're using 38mm or 1.5 inch thick material. Since I'm just using 18mm material, I need to go for shorter wood screws. These 2 outside threaded holes are for the leveling grub screws, and the middle one is for actually securing the router lift. I've removed the old extension wing from the table saw, fitting the new subframe, and this isn't going down far enough. Unfortunately, this bracket here sits a little bit higher than the front bracket, which is what I measured off. So what I'm going to do is just take the jigsaw, cut out a section there, and it'll go down far enough. With the subframe seated properly, I could transfer the hole locations for bolts onto the plywood. I'm using a 10mm bit to drill a slightly oversized hole for the M8 bolts. To attach the top to the subframe, again I'm going with pocket holes. The aluminium T-track can be cut to length easily with standard woodworking tools like a miter saw. The T-track came pre-drilled, but since they use such tiny number 4 screws, I always like to add a few more attachment points. Before I get started on building the fence, I want to talk about both the router and the router lift I'm going for. In Australia, there are very few round-bodied routers, so I picked this one up from Timbercon when they launched it a couple of months ago, but I didn't have a router lift to actually use this in. So I reached out to the folks at Kreg and they were happy to send me their router lift. This is the new one that they launched about 8 months ago now. It has a very thick 3/8 aluminium base, and the clamping mechanism supports up to 4.2 inch diameter routers, but it does support a whole bunch of other ones depending on where these jaws are positioned. The instructions say to raise the router lift, so it's just contacting those O-rings there. The router then drops in like so until it hits the insert plate. We want to make sure the speed controller is at the front. This is the front here where the adjustment screw is. Power switch isn't that important in location, but the speed control is. Then it's just a matter of tightening this one bolt at the back. Once the router is installed in the lift is just dropped into position on the leveling inserts. Then, using a ruler, I can use that as a feeler gauge to see whether everything is level or not. Adjustments can be made from under the table using an Allen key. Onto the fence. You'll find all the cut dimensions in the plans, but really they're just long straight pieces of plywood. The dado stack is used for 4 of the pieces, starting with part B and D. The dados are cut in 2 passes, adjusting the fence to get a good fit with the other plywood parts. It's critical that parts B and D have their dado at the same height. Make sure you cut B and D, then make any fence adjustments to widen the dado. Part A, or the base plate, gets a dado and a rebate to fit parts B and D. The rebate is cut with a sacrificial fence installed to get right up to the edge of the workpiece. After part A's rebate is cut, the table saw is adjusted for part F's rebate, which accepts the T-track. This 1.5" round over bit is one of my largest bits in my collection. It's pretty much the largest I want to have on a router table, so I need to cut out this notch here and the same size notch on this piece of the router fence. That's where the bit will be able to be buried in, and that also provides an entrance for the dust collection. Not that important, it'd be nice clean cut, so I'm just going to use the jigsaw because that's just easier. Holes are drilled in part A for the bolts that lock down the fence to the table. Assembly is dead simple. Glue in the dados and rebates and nail or clamp it together. The idea is to form a nice rigid tube. On the old router table fence I had these sliding faces that you adjust with knobs at the back. The sliding faces are great because it lets you get in closer to the bit so that you can have more of a zero clearance type setup. The problem is the knobs on the back are a bit awkward to use. So as you can see here, fingers kind of get jammed in there, same there, and the bolts actually limit the travel. This could be improved by a different bolt position or that, but ideally I don't want to have to change anything from behind. Plus I'm going to have dust collection going through on the new one. So I'm going to use these bolts with threaded inserts in the fence. These are called connector bolts and they're used on a lot of knockdown furniture. Socket head cap screw would do just fine, but I like these because they've got the large washer style head on them. Because I want these bolts coming through the faces of the fence, I need to route some grooves. So I've already started here and I remembered to turn on the camera. So I need a shallow groove or counterbore for the head of the bolt so they can slide up and down, and then a through hole that matches the shank. These are M6 screws, so a 1/4 inch bit will do great. I'm going to use 2 passes with the 1/2 inch bit to clear all of that out. This is something you could do on the router table using drop through cuts. I hate doing drop through cuts, so I'd prefer to use the plunge router if I can. To attach the adjustable fences, what was part D is drilled for threaded inserts. The inserts I'm using have a flange, so I first counterbored using a 13mm Forstner bit, then drilled an 8mm through hole. This allows for M6 threaded inserts. Part E, the adjustable fences, can then be separated into two. As you can see, I've added just a touch of colour to make it match in with the Sawstop and Kreg stuff. It's the same black water-based dye that I used on the table here, and the red is a similar water-based stuff. For in-fence dust collection, I've hot glued a piece of PVC pipe. This is a 2-inch or 50mm pipe. That's the ID. The OD is a little bit larger than that. I've used hot glue because at this stage I'm not 100% sure whether it's going to work out and whether I need to add any 3D printed fittings or stuff like that. So the hot glue is at least semi-removable. The elbow is just a 2-inch elbow, which is a little bit under the size, but it does fit relatively well on 2.5-inch flex hose. 2-inch flex hose won't quite fit. So the advantage of doing it this way rather than at the back is I don't have extra hoses, particularly when I'm trying to use the table saw, and I can pipe it into my main dust collection. So this goes to my dust collector, though this is far too much pipe. In the next episode, we're going to work on some under the table dust collection and get it all hooked up that way. So I should really give it a test to see whether it works. The previous router I had a built-in lift, and I'd always heard that that was pretty equivalent to the commercial lifts. No, this is much smoother, much easier to adjust and lock down. So I was quite taken back by that. I'm really happy with that plate or that lift. The dust collection built into the fence is actually exceeding my expectations, particularly with the sharp bit. It works really quite nicely. In the next episode, I'll add a dust collection box underneath the table, and the two dust collection ports will join up. Under the table means that when you're not using the fence, say flush trimming for example, you'll still get some level of dust collection, and you'll get enhanced dust collection anyway. There will be plans available for this, but I'll wait until the under the table stuff, so the dust collection and the cabinets for it are built, and that's going to be another couple of weeks away as my wife is in hospital at the moment, so things are a bit up in the air with what I'm doing in here. Thanks for watching.